So I'm not sure where to even start with this. You know how life sometimes throws a curveball at you and it's so big that you're left reeling for years after? Yeah, that happened to me and my family, and it was all because of my dad. So here's the thing. Back when I was a teenager, my dad was everything. At least in my eyes. He was this larger-than-life figure, a man who built his entire world around his business. I mean, the guy didn't just work. He lived, breathed, and ate his company. It wasn't just a job, it was his identity, his pride, his soul. And for as long as I could remember, he was a rock, a symbol of strength and success. He always told me that nothing could ever knock him down, that as long as he worked hard, things would always work out. Then, bam! One day, everything fell apart. And I mean everything. It didn't happen overnight. There were signs, of course, little cracks in the foundation that no one saw coming. But the real disaster came when his business partner, the guy he trusted more than anyone else, straight up ran off with a huge chunk of the company's funds. Like, what kind of a person does that? Who just leaves you high and dry, knowing how much you've put into something? My dad? He was devastated. I could see it in his eyes when he found out. The fire that had always burned so brightly inside him started to fade, little by little. It was like watching someone you love slowly die inside, and there's nothing you can do about it. His company, the thing he had worked his whole life for, was now impossible to save, and no amount of hard work or persistence could fix it. He had to shut the business down completely. And that, right there, was the moment I lost my dad. Not physically, not in any way that anyone would notice, but in every way that mattered. He had always been this proud, strong man, and losing the business was like losing his reason for being. I watched him transform right before my eyes. He went from the guy who always had a plan, who always knew what to do, to someone who couldn't get out of bed. He became a shell of the man he used to be. It was heartbreaking. I'll never forget how he would spend whole days locked in his room, barely eating, barely moving. The vibrant, energetic guy who used to throw himself into everything now felt like a distant memory. And when he did come out, it was only to eat a quick meal before retreating right back into his dark little world. My mom tried everything to pull him out of it, suggesting he take up a hobby or go for a walk or just do anything to break the cycle. But it was like talking to a wall. Every time she tried, he'd snap at her, telling her to leave him alone in that harsh, almost angry tone that was so uncharacteristic of him. It was painful to watch. It wasn't just that he'd lost the business, though. That was bad enough. But the real kicker was seeing him lose himself in the process. Now, you have to understand, this wasn't just about money. It wasn't just about a business going under. It was about everything. The pride, the dreams, the sense of purpose. My dad had poured his entire soul into that company. And when did it collapse? It felt like he collapsed along with it. My family was left in the wreckage, and none of us knew how to pick up the pieces. It was a dark time, and the worst part? We weren't even sure how to talk about it. There was this looming silence in the house, a feeling that no one really knew how to deal with the loss or what to say. Everyone was just existing. And that's when my mom became the real hero of the story. Without skipping a beat, she stepped up and became the breadwinner. She worked as a nurse, long hours and late shifts, just to keep us afloat. But even she could only do so much. Watching her take on that responsibility with such grace, while knowing that my dad was slipping further away from the man he used to be, was just heavy. To be honest, I didn't know what to feel. Anger, sadness, confusion. It was all so much. But above all, I just felt helpless. It wasn't just that my dad had lost everything, it was that in losing it, he had completely changed. That loss became a dark cloud hanging over every conversation, every interaction, and it started to make its way into how I saw myself. I remember feeling like I couldn't do anything right anymore. Even though I tried to excel, tried to be the good kid to fill the void left by my dad's failure, it was never enough. I couldn't help but feel like I was somehow contributing to his unhappiness, even though deep down I knew I wasn't. But here's the thing. No matter how hard I tried, it never seemed to matter. The praise I got from my mom about my grades, my dad would shoot it down, tell me I was capable of so much more, that these grades were nothing to be proud of. At first, my mom would defend me, tell him that I was doing my best, that every little achievement should be recognized. But as time passed, something shifted. Slowly, my mom stopped defending me. She started echoing my dad's comparisons, constantly pitting me against my younger brother Michael. I was always less than him. He was the better one, the more accomplished one, and no matter how hard I tried, I could never measure up. It didn't matter that I was doing my best. What mattered was that I wasn't Michael. It felt like every conversation, every argument came back to this relentless comparison. Soon they imposed new rules: no more basketball, no more after-school activities. I was told that the only thing I could focus on was school, because clearly if I spent all my time studying, I could be as great as Michael. The sport I loved, the one thing that made me feel like I could breathe, was now forbidden. My parents' expectations became so suffocating that my whole world started to shrink down to one thing: grades, and nothing else. I became trapped in my own home. Every moment was spent studying or worrying about what they'd say next. There was no room for rest, no space to just be myself. It was a constant cycle of trying to avoid confrontation, of hoping that if I just worked hard enough, things would get better. But no matter how much I studied, no matter how many grades I brought home, it was never enough. The pressure from my dad was like a weight on my chest. He'd come into my room and check on me, even if I had already finished all my assignments. It didn't matter if I was exhausted or needed a break. He'd make me feel guilty for even taking 5 minutes to myself. If I took a break, I feared the worst, that I was lazy, that I wasn't doing enough. The guilt, the constant fear of disappointing them started to eat me alive. It wasn't just the fear of not living up to their expectations, it was the fear of being caught, of doing something wrong. I remember the anxiety creeping in every time I heard my dad's footsteps approaching my room. If I was reading a comic book, I'd immediately scramble to cover it with a textbook, pretending to study, even though I'd already done all my work. I was terrified that if he saw me relaxing, even for a minute, he'd accuse me of being lazy, of not taking things seriously. It felt like there was no way to win, no way to escape this relentless pressure. My whole life became about avoiding disappointment, avoiding failure. I started feeling like I was losing myself, like I was constantly living in fear. The anxiety bled into everything. Even when I wasn't with my parents, I was still on edge, constantly checking myself. Would this be enough? Would they be proud? Would Michael somehow be better than me again? And honestly, I started to wonder if there was even a point to all of it. The day my parents told me I was going to live with my uncle is one I'll never forget. It wasn't just the words they said, it was the way they said them, as if this decision was already made, as if there was no room for me to argue or have a say. My mom's voice trembled as she explained how Michael, my younger brother, the golden child, was the one they wanted to stay with them. They believed that because of his academic talent, he deserved to stay in the stability of their home to focus on his education. But me? I was going to be sent away. I couldn't wrap my head around it. I had always tried my hardest, tried to be the kid they wanted me to be. Sure, I wasn't perfect, but I loved them. I loved our family, and now, here I was, hearing that because I wasn't Michael, I wasn't enough to stay. The tears came before I could even stop them. I felt like my heart was being ripped out of my chest, and all I could ask through my sobs was, "Do you not love me anymore?" My dad's answer was cold, almost too rational for me to bear. He said it wasn't that they didn't love me, but that they just couldn't afford to take care of both of us. The financial strain had worn them down to the point where they felt Michael needed to stay. He had a better shot at success, they said, because he was the more academically inclined one. So they would send me to my uncle's place where, supposedly, I'd have a fresh start. I could barely believe what I was hearing. They were sending me away. Away from everything I knew, my home, my life, and the very family I thought would always be there for me. The sting of it was almost unbearable. Was I really just a burden to them now? It felt like they were choosing Michael, not just because of his talents, but because he was easier to handle. I wasn't a model student, and I wasn't who they expected me to be. I thought if I worked hard enough, things would get better, but it seemed like nothing I did could make a difference. My mom tried to justify it, saying that as the oldest, I should make the sacrifice, that I should be mature and accept that Michael had a better chance of becoming someone extraordinary. It was almost like they were trying to convince themselves that this was the right thing to do. But in that moment, all I felt was a mixture of rage and heartache. I was hurt. My entire sense of self-worth shattered in front of me. I wasn't just being sent away, I was being told that I didn't matter enough to stay. And so, with no other option, I packed my bags. The day my uncle came to pick me up, I could barely hold it together. The reality of what was happening hit me in waves, and it was like the last bit of security I had left, my family, was being ripped away from me. I remember saying goodbye to Michael, knowing I would still see him at school, but the thought of being separated from him, of not being a part of the same home, was almost too much to bear. As my uncle drove me to his house, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had broken. This wasn't just a change of scenery. This was a rupture in everything I thought I knew about family, love, and my place in the world. And no matter how much I tried to convince myself it was for the best, I couldn't ignore the raw, gnawing ache inside me. When I graduated from university, I thought maybe, just maybe, things could finally settle between my parents and me. It was supposed to be my day, a day to feel accomplished, to finally earn their pride, to have my success recognized in its own right. But even then, on that day that should have been about me, I felt their eyes lingering on Michael's future potential more than my present achievements. They couldn't just let me have that moment, the one where I could feel like I had made them proud. No, instead of praising me for how hard I worked, how far I had come, they spent the day talking about Michael's prospects, his future, his potential, as if that was what mattered most. And that's what hit me the hardest. It wasn't even a competition for me. I loved Michael. I wanted him to do well. I wanted him to achieve his dreams. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was never enough. Not because of anything I did, but because I was never going to be Michael. It wasn't just that day. It was every visit after that. Whenever they came to see me at university, they'd talk about their pride in me, but it always seemed to fade into a conversation about Michael, his accomplishments, his potential, his future. Meanwhile, my life, my reality, was slipping through the cracks. It was as if no matter what I did, I was always overshadowed by the idea of who I wasn't, and I tried to make peace with it. But it wasn't easy. Then came the twist I didn't see coming, Michael's college application. He didn't get into his first choice university. My parents were crushed. It wasn't that his second choice was a bad one, it wasn't that it wasn't still a good school, but in their eyes, it was nowhere near the prestigious place they had been banking on, the one that would let them proudly flaunt their son's success in comparison to mine. Suddenly, the narrative they had carefully built, the story of Michael being the academic star, the one who had it all, was shaken. They couldn't brag about his achievements anymore, and that left them scrambling. They were frustrated. They didn't know how to reconcile their expectations with this new reality. And though a part of me felt vindicated, like the scales had tipped in my favor for once, another part of me couldn't help but feel for Michael. He was still my brother. And even though he had been a constant comparison, he didn't deserve to feel like a failure. I knew he had tried his best. Over time, the distance between me and my parents grew. It wasn't just the lack of communication. It was the way things had always been. I stopped reaching out to them. They stopped calling me. We were all living our own lives in different worlds, separated not just by geography, but by this constant undercurrent of competition and comparison. I had to face the fact that I wasn't going to be the child they wanted me to be. And somehow, I was okay with it. After graduation, I took a job across the country. I was nervous about leaving everything behind, but my uncle and aunt, who had been my unwavering support, encouraged me to go. They believed in me when no one else had. And that job? It turned out to be the best decision I could have made. I saved money, made wise investments, and over the next few years, I watched my financial situation and my life improve. 4 years ago, I landed a senior managerial position at a major corporation. The salary boost was massive, and with it, I could afford a lifestyle I had only ever dreamed of. 2 years ago, I bought my own home, a place to call my own, a space where I could finally breathe without the weight of their comparisons. I still haven't gotten married, no kids yet, but that's okay, because for the first time in a long time, I could focus on myself. I could spend my money on things that made me happy, things that were just for me. And through it all, I didn't forget my uncle and aunt. They had given me a fresh start, a place to rebuild my life when I had no idea what to do next. I stayed in touch with them, and made sure they knew how much I appreciated everything they had done. Birthdays, Christmas, just little tokens of my gratitude. They had always been there for me, and I was going to make sure they knew how much that meant. Even though I'd built this new life for myself, I still felt that quiet ache when it came to my parents. The relationship was fractured, beyond repair for now. But in a way, I had found peace. It wasn't the life I'd envisioned, but it was mine, and for once, that was enough. The tension between me and my dad had been building for years, but there was one particular moment that I'll never forget. I had just achieved something monumental. I'd bought my own home, something I had worked hard for, a symbol of how far I had come since those dark days. It should have been a moment of celebration. Yet when my dad, still living in the shadow of his own failures, made a comment about my new home, it hit a nerve. He accused me of lying about it. He seemed genuinely unable to believe that someone like me, someone who had been written off so easily, could achieve such a huge thing. It pissed me off. I wasn't going to let that slide. So, without thinking about the consequences, I snapped back at him. I told him I would never lie about owning a house, that not everyone was a loser who depended on their wife for financial support like he had done for all these years. My words caught him off guard. I could see the surprise in his eyes, as if he couldn't fathom that his son, would speak to him like that. But I wasn't done. I went on to tell him exactly how I felt, about how his lack of faith in me had been one of the most painful parts of growing up. No matter what I did, it was never enough. I was always compared to Michael, always told I wasn't good enough. But I wasn't that little boy anymore, and I wasn't going to let him keep pushing me down with his toxic comparisons. I'm doing well for myself, I told him. Not that I have to prove it to you, but the fact that you can't even recognize my achievements speaks more about your inability to see beyond your own insecurities than about me. And frankly, that's your problem, not mine. It felt good to finally say it. For years, I had been the one who was dismissed, the one who had been overlooked in favor of Michael. It was time for him to hear the truth. I also pointed out that I was the only one who had supported Michael's business when he had no other prospects, and that my dad needed to recognize the person I had become. I wasn't the kid he had abandoned. I had fought my way up, and now I was thriving. "Get your head out of the gutter and start respecting who I am," I told him. I knew my words were harsh. I could see the hurt on his face as I spoke. But in that moment, I didn't feel sorry. I felt justified. For all those years of being compared, dismissed, and made to feel less than, I had finally stood up for myself. I had finally spoken my truth. Afterward, my mom called me, upset and asking me to apologize. She said I had hurt my dad deeply, that my words had embarrassed him, and that I had no right to point out that he still depended on her financially. But I couldn't apologize. I wouldn't back down. I had spent so long swallowing my feelings, trying to please them, trying to earn their respect and approval. But in the end, it was clear they didn't see me. They couldn't see me. So I refused. I refused to apologize for speaking the truth. Update. Just to clarify a few things, my dad never returned to work after his business failed. He tried a few different ventures, but he wasn't suited for the grind of a 9-to-5 job. Instead, he became a stay-at-home dad, relying on my mom to support him financially. He does some freelance consulting work here and there, but the bulk of the financial burden has been on her shoulders. Michael knows about the strained relationship between me and our parents. He's never been part of the favoritism, never supported their comparison game. He genuinely loves me and has always tried to be there for me, even when our parents didn't. Back when our parents sent me to live with my uncle, Michael was just a kid. He couldn't do much, but he always tried his best to support me in the little ways he could. Despite the tension between me and our parents, I knew my brother never wanted to be part of their narrative. And I think that's what hurt my parents the most. Michael was the good son, the one they thought they could shape into their ideal, but it was me who ended up thriving. It must have been a slap in the face for them. They probably never expected me to succeed, let alone become financially independent, happy, and secure. It's not easy for them to accept. They can't wrap their heads around the fact that I've become successful. It goes against everything they believed would happen when they decided to push me away. But here's the thing. I don't need their approval anymore. I'm proud of who I've become, and I've worked damn hard to get here. And no matter how much they try to rewrite the narrative, I'm the one who gets to decide my story now. The aftermath of that confrontation with my dad was something I wasn't fully prepared for. The hurt I saw on his face was a punch to my gut, but I couldn't take back what I said. It wasn't just about the house or my career or the years of comparison. It was about me finally reclaiming my own identity. But despite my refusal to apologize, things between my parents and me have remained strained. My mom still calls occasionally, trying to bridge the gap, but the damage has been done. And while I know they still hold some hope that I'll come crawling back, seeking their approval, I won't. I've learned to live without it. What I've realized, though, is that my relationship with Michael has only grown stronger. Through all the turmoil, through all the favoritism, we've learned to lean on each other. He's always been there for me, even when our parents weren't. And now, as we navigate our adult lives, I feel like I finally understand the importance of the bonds we share. Not the bonds our parents tried to create through competition, but the kind of bond built on mutual respect, love, and understanding. As for me, I've continued to build the life I always wanted. I've invested wisely, secured my future, and surrounded myself with people who appreciate me for who I am. I've chosen happiness on my own terms, without needing to validate my success through anyone else's approval. My dad may never fully accept me, and that's a hard truth to face, but I'm okay with it now. I don't need his validation to know that I've turned out okay. In fact, I've turned out better than okay. I've turned out stronger, freer, and finally, Story 2. It's time to raise a chair. In the lounge, we have another fantastic story for you today. When you have a father who is lousy with money and charges you rent, who needs a horrible stepmother? In our lounge today, Opie's own fairy grandfather waved his checkbook toward her. Wand! My dad is being punished by Grandpa. Although I have the ability to stop it, I'm not sure whether I want to. I'm using a throwaway because I don't want my primary account to be revealed to any friends or relatives who could view this. I thus have some really confidential information there. I'm a 21-year-old woman who lost my mother when I was 14. I was 17 when my dad got married again. There is a daughter of my stepmother, female, 15. She had a boy with her father, Dot. She recently gave birth to a young girl after having 3 boys. In any case, I have worked since I was 16 in order to save money for personal purchases. That's when I turned 18. I should start paying my rent now that I was an adult. He would still pay for food and other necessities, so the $500 was only a symbolic sum. Dot. We argued because I was angry, but I finally agreed, and up until 7 months ago, that was the plan. I was told by my father that I had 2 months to go. They both had own workplaces, so it's crazy that they would require my room for the kid when my stepmother was pregnant. Since my baby brother was born, my stepmother has been a stay-at-home parent, so she doesn't even need one. However, they insisted that I relocate. Just an addition, by the way. My stepmother and I recover. All right. We don't quarrel or fight. Who knows, but I don't believe this was a wicked stepmother moment. In actuality, my stepsister and I get along well. I discuss her personal issues with her and assist her with her assignments. I really, truly adore her. Let S get back to the tale. I'm at a loss on what to do. I'm attending a university. My career goal is to work part-time as a civil engineer. I don't have enough money to live alone. I gave my aunt a call and asked if I might temporarily live with her until I discovered a solution. Make a rent payment offer? No. She was horrified by my actions. I could definitely live with her, she added. She claimed she would deal with my dad, but she also indicated there was no need for rent. Grandpa visited our home the following day, and they had a private conversation. Although I could hear my dad's irate voice, I was unable to comprehend a word he was saying. Grandpa visited my room for a bit and told me I had 3 options. The first was to stay with my dad and stepmother, just as I was. Other than not having to pay rent, nothing would change. The second was going to live with him and either my aunt or my grandmother. The third was for me to find an apartment on my own, and he would cover the expenses and rent. I don't have to make a decision right now, he added. I could continue to live with Dad. Additionally, I could just inform him if I changed my mind. In fact, I felt relieved that this crazy was finished and that I could still live with Dad. However, my stepmother was really nasty to me in the days and weeks that followed, and I felt really uneasy in my own house. I made the decision to move out and inform Grandpa about it when even Casey noticed and questioned me why they were upset with me. He promised to handle everything. He relocated me into one of his rental apartments a few weeks later. It's a beautiful flat. He got me a stove, refrigerator, and other necessities. He handed me a $15,000 check, stating it would assist me start living on my own and that I could stay there for as long as I wanted without paying rent as long as I was working or studying. Since I moved out, I haven't had much touch with my dad. He never paid them or me a visit. My stepsister in particular is someone I really miss. I'm still hurt, though. The birth of my stepmother occurred 2 weeks ago. I paid them a visit in the hospital. Although a little odd, it was good to see them and my younger sister, In any case, my dad called me a few days ago to say he missed me. I should return home since the kids miss me. I told him I would give it some thought after he apologized for asking me to move out and other things. When I told my aunt yesterday what my dad had said, my cousin chuckled and remarked, "I'm sure he does." They gave me a lot of information when I inquired what he meant. So far, unknown details. In essence, both my aunt's and my dad's house is actually my grandpa's. In essence, Dad made the same agreement with me that he did with all of his children and some grandchildren. He never wished for any member of his family to have to worry about necessities like food and housing. When I phoned my aunt at the time, she called my grandfather, who was upset with my dad for charging me rent in addition to evicting me. He threatened to have my dad evicted that day after tearing my new one at his house. Now for the trivial aspect. Grandpa handed me $15K, as you are aware. He's forcing Dad to reimburse him for the rent I paid him over the years. In addition, he is billing my parents $1,200 for the flat I live in and the lost rent. Call me foolish or stupid, but I had no idea my dad wasn't making that much money until today. The house we resided in was gray. I had pretty wealthy lifestyles and constantly took vacations. Grandpa has, however, presumably always provided behind-the-scenes assistance. With 3 children at home, a single source of income, and the obligation to repay Grandpa, my cousin now believes that Dad is experiencing difficulties. He claims that his father wants me back because he thinks that if I move back in with them, Grandpa won't punish him as much. To be honest, I have no idea what to do. Although I've been enjoying living alone for the past 6 months, I do miss them a lot. My siblings are missed. I long for the life we led prior to everything. However, I'm not sure if returning home is the best course of action. In addition, I'm offended that he wants me back for financial gain. To be honest, I simply wanted to let everything out. The audience has left some remarks. Let's start. Remain at your current location. From a distance, you can love and miss them. Go spend time with your aunts or grandfather's relatives. They appear to be true family. Additionally, make an effort to visit a therapist. The original poster addresses a number of remarks, but he doesn't want you. He demands money, even though you know that this would just make you feel worse and diminish your value. The strange aspect is that, although I am aware of this, it is also challenging to watch my dad in that state. I've been wondering for the last 6 months why I was kicked out if I had done something wrong. I'm thinking now, was money the main factor? Consider establishing new customs with your grandparents and aunt. They want you around because they adore you. Yes, they have been excellent. Whenever I can, I go see them. Even though Grandma isn't feeling well, she came to see me on my birthday. I'm really fortunate to have them and their backing, and I appreciate your nice remarks. Furthermore, it seems unlikely that your grandpa would be persuaded to alter the rent. Even if you were to move back in, your father would still be paying. In order to avoid paying for your costs, he is billing your father. It makes sense. After reading what others have to say, I feel more at ease remaining in my current location. Less culpable. But perhaps I should discuss it with Grandpa and get his opinion. I quote, "We've been too shielded from knowledge. I understand now. I believe I must throwing you out for a new baby after charging you rent while you're still in high school. A classic move. And now, rather than because he truly misses you, he wants you back because he is drowning in debt. Well done, Dad. And now that your dad's financial ship has sunk, he's frantically trying to find the one person who can save him. You. However, it's likely that you'll wind up with a chore schedule that resembles a financial ledger if you step back. Remain with your aunt and grandfather. There. This is the true MVP. Furthermore, living rent-free while pursuing your education seems like a far better option than acting as your dad's walking, talking rescue. Revise. Since everyone has been so nice and helpful to me, I wanted to offer you all an update. The support you provided me with was so overwhelming. 1,000 times over, thank you. Just responding to a few inquiries. My father's side of the family includes my aunt and grandfather, my mother's side. I don't have a lot of contact, unfortunately. Mom died before my grandparents did. Although they don't live nearby, I occasionally get to see my uncles and aunts. On my father's side, I also have 2 additional uncles. Though not as close as my aunt, I am nonetheless close to them. When Mom passed away, she was my rock. She's like a second mother to me. My stepmother was aware of my rent payments. When the stepsister turned 18, it was intimated that she would have to follow suit. I'm not sure, though, if she was aware that Dad didn't own the house or how much grandfather had contributed monetarily to Dad's renovation. I phoned my dad on Monday, the day after I posted, and informed him that I had made the decision not to go back. Nothing was said by me. All I was told was that I felt comfortable here and that going back would be a step backward. However, I added that I wanted to stay in touch with them. They are free to ask me to supper at any time. I also mentioned how much I would love to have my brother and stepsister visit me at home. He was disappointed, but at least his tone didn't contain any furious tears. In essence, though, he remarked, "We'll see," and stopped there. I was disappointed too. However, he contacted me on Friday to ask if I would want to join him for lunch on Saturday. Grandpa and Grandma already made plans, I said. We planned a supper for Thursday after he inquired about my availability. My stepsister hasn't heard any of this from me. We frequently text and converse. She hasn't heard them mention me either, but she did mention that her mom's mother, her grandmother, is there to help with the baby and is being really unpleasant. That made me giggle. I wanted to invite her to stay with us, but I didn't want her to get all worked up simply because her father wouldn't accept. I will attempt to speak with them. Thursday. The major news is that I recently returned from a visit with Grandpa and Grandma. Together, we had a great day. However, I added that I was curious about everything that was happening. I felt like I was living in deception since I was no longer a child. The things my aunt and cousin told me last week were the most significant. There were a couple more, though. Since Dad hasn't had 1 cent saved up, Grandpa has been paying for a lot of our necessities, such as education, healthcare, etc. Additionally, prior to her death, he and my mother made the majority of the contributions to my education fund. That makes sense, I suppose. It was also foolish of me to not recognize this earlier, because he didn't want my stepsister to feel left out and denied the same possibilities as her siblings. He also set up funds for my younger siblings and my stepsister. This dude is amazing. I adore him a great deal. Indeed, I consider myself really fortunate to have received so many comments on this. Not negatively, but in a really kind and encouraging manner. I'm aware of how fortunate I am to have grandparents and other family members who are willing and able to assist me. One day, I hope I will be able to assist others as they assist me. In any case, he reassured me that Dad is doing well when I voiced some concerns about his financial status. More than acceptable. For a while, he will need to be less extravagant with his money, but he will never allow any of his children or grandchildren to suffer or be in need of anything. I'll remain out of it since, as several of you mentioned, he's attempting to teach Dad a lesson that I ought to have imparted to him years ago. I doubt I'll let Dad know that I am aware of all of this. Although a lot of you mentioned confronting him, I believe it's better that way, if he still believes I'm unaware. Finally, we discussed the reasons behind my father's expulsion, nor did he have a response. I could see that his actions had caused him and Grandma much pain. He said he requested an explanation but received none. For now, that's all. Having a relationship with my siblings other than my dad and stepmother is something I'll keep attempting. I also make an effort to have supper with them once a week. You should at least attempt to establish a connection with my father, even if I know that most of what you have stated about him is accurate. For myself and my siblings, if not for him. Don't worry, though, I will never longer allow him to harm me. The audience left us one remark. The GOAT is your granddad. He is the kind of person I wish I had in my life. I continue to believe that your father is attempting to forget his previous marriage. Your mother, I quote, V, heard of these things much too frequently. Perhaps not deliberately, though. Right now, I'm not sure if he's telling the truth. I hope everything works out for you. Who knew that every dad who manages his finances had a grandfather waiting to intervene with a checkbook and a life lesson? I must give you credit for the way you dealt with your father, informing him that you wouldn't return without telling him all the juicy information. That quote a whole new level of self-control. I would have been tempted to stop talking and leave, but your strategy maintains harmony and your grandfather's grand scheme. Additionally, it's a sophisticated move to offer to stay in touch and spend time with your siblings. Just be ready for some uncomfortable dinners where tension is the main course and unresolved issues are the side dish. Perhaps the next time he will reconsider using his own daughter to collect rent. Hopefully, his experience will make him understand that family isn't a source of income. It's about love and support, and your grandpa has plenty of both. In relation to your grandfather, he is a legendary figure. Even the coldest hearts can be warmed by the generosity of setting up money for everyone, including your stepsister. In a sense, he is your story's fairy godfather, ensuring that everyone has a chance at a better future. It's wonderful to see that you recognize how fortunate you are to have him. Continue to concentrate on your studies and relish your freedom. Additionally, keep in mind that you are not living alone. You're doing well. You seem to have a bright future ahead of you, and your grandfather is there to support you. How do you interpret this? Would you have moved out or remained with your father? We appreciate you coming to your lounge today. To ensure you don't miss our next video, please press the notification bell, like, and subscribe. I'll see you shortly. Additionally, kindly return your chair to its original location.